Hello again, guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Comic Kid here again, and today we will be continuing our In Defense Of for the DCEU movies leading up to Justice League. And if y'all watch my Man of Steel review, that means you know next up is none other than 2016's Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And before we get started, I do want to mention that I am probably going to be putting out fewer videos on YouTube in the upcoming months. I do have a bunch of other projects that I'm super excited to be working on, and so as much as I love making YouTube videos and just the small community that I do have, it unfortunately doesn't pay the bills, and so I do need to work on some projects that are going to help me with that. But as always, be sure to hit like and subscribe, and let's dive right in. Now, like I said with Man of Steel, it's really hard to deny that BVS is at least great art, in the sense that, you know, it's been out since 2016 and people are still talking about this movie. Now, obviously, there is a ton of behind-the-scenes drama with this film, and there's the extended cut, which is specifically the version we'll be talking about today. But there has been so much behind-the-scenes drama between Zack Snyder, Warner Brothers, the cast, crew, everything. Most of y'all watching are probably familiar with a lot of it already. And so that is one of the first things that can be said in defense of the film, is that they really should have released the ultimate version to begin with. The theatrical cut was undoubtedly filled with various plot holes and certain gaps in weird editing that just didn't quite make sense and line up. And honestly, if you watch the Ultimate Edition, I feel like even if you don't like it, you'll still agree that it is the better version of the film. You really get a sense that there was far more character development, and they really took the time to kind of flesh out the main plot at hand. And a lot of people who didn't like the theatrical actually ended up really liking the Ultimate Edition. Personally, I felt like the theatrical was okay, but I was really surprised by the Ultimate cut. That said, it doesn't really add any action, and so it is a very plot-driven, kind of slower superhero movie. Now, from there you get into the point of our superhero movies art and so on and so forth, and I won't touch too much on that in this, but because it's so plot heavy, a lot of people who have an idea of what a quote-unquote traditional superhero movie might look like to them, this still isn't your average Marvel movie where it's a lot of explosions and action just kind of throughout. It's very plot driven, there's not a lot of action, and basically if you're there for the fight scenes, then what you saw in theaters was really everything that you got. But now that we've established that, let's go ahead and jump into some of the wide criticisms of the film. Now, I feel like a lot of people were very nitpicky in regards to this, and stuff that just wasn't a big deal ended up being just a massive deal to some people, especially seeing the Wayne murders again. Now, personally, because it's such a driving force for Batman as a character, I don't care if we see it every new iteration of Batman. And I don't think Robert Pattinson and Matt Reeves' Batman movie will show the Wayne deaths, but I get it. We know the story, but it's such an integral part to Batman's character. And I definitely think they did it really well in BVS. You know, it's just a short, quick little clip, and it really does a good job of hammering home the Martha moment, which we'll get to later in the video as well. So aside from people nitpicking certain things towards it, I think that's just some hate towards Zack Snyder, and not something that's actually wrong with the film itself. But again, stuff like seeing the Wayne deaths again, that's just an opinion. So, with that in mind, the film was also criticized for being extremely dark. Again, I would kind of disagree with this. It's still as much a Batman movie as it is a Superman movie, and so you'd expect it to be pretty dark. Now, as far as its overall treatment of Superman, at least in my opinion, I never thought that he was too dark, unless of course you count the nightmare sequence. But as far as the film overall, like, I felt like it was an appropriate tone and color palette. And, you know, eventually we know they were gonna kind of brighten things up anyways, but I would not say being too dark was a problem. And then, of course, you have some of the massive complaints, such as Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor and the Martha moment, both of which we'll get to in segments like casting. Now, overall, I felt the film was pretty well casted. You get a lot of spillover from Man of Steel, and so you see like Amy Adams, Lois Lane, and Lawrence Fishburne's Perry White again, and obviously Henry Cavill is back as Superman. So, you know, generally the cast is pretty solid. Obviously, people had their gripes with how Ben's Batman acted. Not like Ben's performance, but like the actions he took within the narrative of the film. But most people can agree that Ben Affleck made for a great Batman. I know a lot of people consider him to be the best on-screen Batman, and there's definitely no denying that the suit is pulled straight from the Dark Knight Returns comics. And for an older Batman who's lost his Robin and has been in Gotham for 20 years, I'd say that, yeah, Ben did a great job in this film. Now, all the other newer side characters are worth mentioning because they do add a lot to the film in their own ways, but Lex Luthor is really the only other major addition to the universe in this movie that wasn't in Man of Steel. Now, everyone seems to dislike Jesse Eisenberg's Luthor, but I do think it's worth noting that this is really the first Lex Luthor to truly just have Superman like by the balls, and just he has outsmarted him in every way, shape, and form. He has outsmarted Batman. And so this version of Lex Luthor is definitely, like he says, not used to losing. And so I do think it's interesting how Zack kind of achieved the same result with this character while putting a more unconventional spin on him as well. That said, as far as his personality goes, a lot of people really didn't like the kind of jittery and erratic version of Lex Luthor. However, if you read anything before Crisis on Infinite Earths, it's easy to see how you would get that version of the character. Before Crisis, he was sort of a mad scientist type character, and you can say that it was a product of the times, but even when they quote-unquote brought this version back, in the form of Lex Luthor Jr., who is Lex Luthor during the Death of Superman arc, he's definitely more of an outspoken, kind of erratic and kind of random version of Lex. Now, eventually that version ended up being like the real one, and that's a whole other like complicated story within the comics. But I think people just got used to seeing the kind of like posh, pristine, well-polished business version of Lex that's been made popular through like the animated series and especially the more recent comics, and I definitely prefer that version of the character myself. But to say that Eisenberg's Lex Luthor is nothing like the comic books, I would definitely say that is incorrect. I have read plenty of comics, and especially since BVS came out, where if I read it like Eisenberg would have read it, it definitely comes across in that manner. So while yes, I wasn't the biggest fan of Eisenberg's Luthor, and I would have probably preferred the more businessman, professional type approach to the character, they're definitely digging deep into the source material as far as Eisenberg's interpretation goes. And I definitely don't feel like he's an abomination or a disgrace to the comic book character either. That said, regardless of if you like that version of Lex or not, it's still a pretty solid performance from Jesse Eisenberg. Like, that dude was off the wall crazy, and I really thought it was interesting to see him transferred to Arkham Asylum by the end of the film. And so while I do wish they would have gone for a different version of Lex, like, Eisenberg's acting in this movie is definitely a wonderful, wonderful performance all around. Now, like I kind of briefly touched on earlier, there is the matter of the brutality of Ben Affleck's Batman in this movie. Now, this was a super common criticism, especially given Batman's strict, like, no-killing rule, and I do think it's a bit unfair to judge the film in this regard, or at least to hold it against the film in this regard. Every other cinematic Batman, I believe with the exception of George Clooney, has killed on screen, and, you know, they haven't really hit it, and so to say that Ben Affleck's Batman shouldn't have killed, I do think that's a bit unfair. Now, he's certainly brutal about it, and they definitely don't try and hide it in any way. Like, he mowed them down. But the other important thing to keep in mind in regards to this particular version of the character is that it's an older Batman. We've seen it plenty of times in the comics, and despite the popularity of Dark Knight Returns and the number of people who consider it to be one of the best Batman stories and interpretations of all time, when they see that exact version of the character brought to life on the big screen, I think it's a little weird that people suddenly have complaints. The other thing is that this Batman is not only an older Batman and a more exhausted and tired Batman, but he's also a Batman without a Robin. And especially after Jason Todd's death in the comics, we know that Batman was more brutal, he wasn't thinking as clearly, he was making rushed and brash mistakes, and so that's why Tim really reinforces the idea of Batman needs a Robin. And so given everything that has happened to Bruce Wayne in his life, especially around the time period that the film takes place, being without a Robin, you suddenly have an alien that can destroy the whole planet in the blink of an eye living on the planet, and he basically is responsible for the deaths of a bunch of your employees. Like, it makes sense that this Bruce would become obsessed with Superman and would allow himself to be manipulated by Lex Luthor despite his own intelligence at hand. And that also really kind of reinforces the theme of Superman as a symbol of hope, is because by the end of the film, Batman does come around to see things, not really like see things in Superman's way, but Superman does re-inspire the hope that Bruce Wayne has lost in the 20 years that he's been Batman. So when you kind of factor into the context clues of the film, and I guess it would require some knowledge of the comics as well, it's definitely easy to see how this version of Batman could come around, especially in a more modern and realistic type setting as well. Now, as far as the soundtrack is concerned, the movie is scored by both Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL, and I personally think it's a pretty strong soundtrack. It's nothing too special. I definitely prefer the Man of Steel soundtrack, but there's no denying the iconic Wonder Woman theme that Junkie kind of created. In all honesty, I wasn't a huge fan of it at first, but it did come to grow on me. And there are a bunch of little Easter eggs kind of sprinkled throughout the soundtrack even, like Lex Luthor's theme is a distorted version of Superman's theme. And so just small little things like that really kind of help me to appreciate it more, even though it may not add anything overall. So as much as I do enjoy the soundtrack, I wouldn't say it's Hans Zimmer or Junkie XL's best work, but there's no denying that songs like A Beautiful Lie and Black and Blue and obviously like Is She With You are pretty solid songs all around. But we don't really need to touch on the soundtrack too much. But speaking of Wonder Woman, most people know and love Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, and she was definitely one of the strongest points, like undisputably, in this whole movie. The woman just radiates Wonder Woman, and everything about her just screams Wonder Woman. And so not only was she perfectly cast, but all around she was done wonderfully in the film. she's not in the film too much, so that it kind of overshadows the main conflict between the two main characters, but it also does a great job of setting her up and giving her the spotlight, especially in that Doomsday fight scene as well. And seeing her fight in there especially, like, was incredibly awesome. Now, to get into the infamous Martha moment. This has been one of the most disputed points in the film since it came out, like even in the Ultimate Edition, and I personally don't get why people hate it so much. It's not like they're suddenly the best of friends after this. Like, yes, you get the line where Bruce saves Martha Kent and is like, I'm a friend of your son's, but obviously, like, they're not best friends. I think people using that as evidence of their friendship is just them reading too much into it. But as far as it being used to actually end the fight, you gotta keep in mind that the film technically takes place over a span of 18 months, or at least it's been 18 months since the events of Man of Steel happened. So Batman has spent over a year hating Superman and planning to kill him, basically, and he spent a year thinking he's been fighting this alien who is all-powerful and can destroy the planet in the blink of an eye, and to suddenly be shown his humanity is very important because Bruce suddenly realizes that everything he thought he knew about Clark and Superman has been wrong, and Bruce realizes how wrong he's been, and that's what stops the fight. It's not that their moms have the same name, it's that he's finally seeing Clark's own humanity, while also being reminded of his own in the process. And you get a few great lines where he's like, you're not brave, men are brave. The Martha moment really proves that, yeah, Superman is a human first and is a man and is brave, and so yeah, everything Bruce thought he knew about Clark is suddenly revealed to him as incorrect, and so I really don't get why people had such an issue with that scene in particular. I've heard the argument that it could have been done better, and like, maybe I feel like there's always going to be some theoretical better way to do a scene, but I personally had no issues with it, and I got it. And you really see the evidence of Bruce's revelation kind of come in at the end when he's talking to Diana at Clark's funeral, and he's saying things like men are still good and all that stuff. And so just because their moms have the same name is not why the fight ended. It's all in that Bruce finally realizes that he has been so wrong. But that's really all I have to say about the general, like, bad quotey fingers of the film. And as far as the general good of it goes, I definitely feel like the warehouse scene is undisputably one of the best fight scenes in all of comic book movies. Just seeing Ben Affleck, I mean, it's not actually Ben Affleck, but seeing that version of Batman move the way he does, and just the actual, like, hand-to-handness of his fighting style was fantastic. A lot of Arkham game vibes, and it's definitely a fight scene like we haven't seen in a Batman movie before. And a lot of scenes are just pulled straight from the comics, especially like the scene with KG Beast at the end. Also, for those of you who don't know, the Russian in the film is KG Beast. They call him the Russian because KG Beast is a little corny, but they do tell you that his name is Anatoly Knaisev, and I hope I say that right. And so yeah, you're supposed to understand that he's KG Beast, who is one of the most, I guess, infamous kills in all of Batman's history. But in the comics, he locks him in a vault, and there was such pushback to Batman drowning KG Beast in a vault that they eventually revealed a few issues later that, oh, he had called the police and they got him out in time, and they kind of retconned that. But yeah, Batman has killed KG Beast in the comics, and so I had no issues with him really doing that in this movie, but especially that scene where he burst through the wall and a lot of just like dialogue in his actual fight with Superman is pulled straight from the Dark Knight Returns comic book. And so I do think the movie is far more accurate to the source material than a lot of people might realize. And as far as the nightmare sequence goes, a lot of people, especially when the film originally came out, didn't get it. That I didn't quite understand. I mean, like, you have the nightmare sequence and flash right after, so it's clearly setting up something in the future, and we all know we're gonna see it again, is part of Zack Snyder's Justice League. But I feel like I feel like this movie especially gets a lot of hate just because it needed some patience from its audience. We are jumping right into DC's cinematic universe with this one, and so we're gonna have questions, we're gonna have things that aren't quite explained, especially if like Dick Grayson is actually the Robin who died and all that. Like, we're gonna have questions, we're gonna need to know why things are different, and it's gonna take time for them to explain that. That said, do I agree that they probably should have done a solo movie kind of like Marvel did? Yes, especially for general audiences, but personally I have no issues waiting. But now they've gone and changed course and all that, so we'll just kind of have to see how things turn out and play it by ear. But overall, I do enjoy Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and I'm not like some huge like Snyder lover or anything. I definitely feel like he's done some bad movies, but I did enjoy Man of Steel and BVS, and I'm hoping I'll enjoy his version of Justice League just as well. But that is about everything that I have for y'all today. I definitely feel as though this is a longer one, but again, it's in defense of, and I feel like there's a lot that can be said in defense of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. But let me know what you guys think of the film down in the comments section below. Be sure to hit like and subscribe as always, and I will see you guys again real soon.